And my phone is constantly doing that thing now where it like uninstalls it and grays it out kind of. And it's like, oh, you want to use it again? Well, you haven't used it in so long. And every time there's a new productivity app out or something that says it's going to save you a little bit of time, I'll download it. I'll just download it. I'm just like, oh, just download everything. Is it free? Okay, I'll download it. And of course, all of them on my phone always are like, in-purchase things are going to be happening there. And so it's like always like, it's not really free. But on my computer, I have the same problem. I open a million tabs. Did you know that 603 is as many tabs as you can have open on Chrome? It won't open anymore. I found out. Also, your computer will act like it is just running mashed potatoes through the thing. It's like, blah, it goes very slowly. Yeah, I always have too many apps open, too many tabs open, and most of the time, I don't need that. I'm only using a very few of those. And so I feel like this sometimes, like I can't figure out what's going on. The other day I did have music, or it was a video that was playing. It was like an ad, on one of those sites that you've pulled up where it's like news and then it's got ads that run in the background. And I had that behind another window. And so I was going through all these like 600 tabs trying to find out which one was playing music. And I couldn't find it. I wanted to kill it. And come to find out it was a different window that was open. So it was driving me crazy and bananas. And maybe that's happened to you sometimes. But think about your phone, if you have a smartphone, and think about in particular how many apps are on there. I mean, take a look at it right now. Look at how many apps. We're not going to have you show us how many apps you have or anything like that. This is just for you and your phone. But I want you to think for a moment, how many of those do you actually use? Like on a regular basis, let's say daily or weekly or monthly. Well, some research was done a few years ago, and they tracked over the last couple years of how many apps are on phones versus how many get used daily versus how many get used monthly versus never get opened almost. And this is what the research has shown. 9. 9 is the average number of apps people use per day. On average, about 30 get opened per month. But most of us have over 80 apps installed on our phone. So that means like 62% of our apps never see the light of day in a given month. Isn't that wild that we have so many of these things and so many good intentions? And it's a little scary because there are some ways to go into your phone and have it tell you what apps you're using and what apps you're not. It's a little scary sometimes you see, oh, I've opened that game 100 times and the budgeting app, 0. Oops. Or I've opened Grubhub 1,000,000 times and that diet and exercise app, 0, right? I mean, that's kind of how it is. We have all these great intentions, but sometimes we don't even open these apps once a month. It's funny to me that they're called applications, apps. And yet, by not opening them, we're doing the very opposite of application. We're just letting it sit there and kind of rot on our phone and take up space. And it's got potential, right? Apps are latent with potential. Some of you have apps like I do for productivity. I have an app that gives me book summaries so that I can decide what books I want to read and what books I don't want to read. And every day I get a notification to go check it, and every day I ignore that notification. I don't turn it off because that'd be too far. I let it tell me that it's got a new book for me, and I'm like, yeah, maybe later. Yeah, maybe later. I mean, I've done this for like 6 months now. And I'm like, I've got to at some point open this app and read the 6 month worth of book summaries so I can figure out a new book. But it's kind of like, I don't know if you're like this with books. I tend to buy books and put them on my shelf and put them on my desk. So I've got to look at it sometime, right? And then eventually I can't see the monitor anymore, so I have to start shoving them to the side so that I can see the monitor again. I've got a lot of latent potential there. And sometimes having the motivation, the oomph to take that next step is what's most difficult. Applications, apps, when we don't use them, are just potential. But if they don't get opened, they're hardly being applied, are they? And that's what we're going to look at in this series. We're going to look at apps, some ideas of applications in your life, and I'm treating you and I like we're smartphones, that we have a lot of things that are just latent, that are just full of potential, that if we would open them, use them, execute them, apply them, they could be really beneficial. We're going to look at 3 applications that have been given to the church very early on for believers in Jesus Christ. And so this series is geared towards people that have said, yes, I want to trust Jesus. Although, if you're not there yet, there are some interesting things to learn here about what has sustained this Christian church for over 2,000 years, what made this movement different than many religious movements that popped up and died out, what took this movement from 12 people to, almost 3 billion today, what has moved it across every continent. These 3 practices have helped this movement survive. Even the most darkest of times, in medieval times when books were burned in the Dark Ages and people were trying to stamp out Christianity, and we lost many writings and many scrolls were lost. And yet still, as many very brilliant, very powerful, very influential people have tried to stamp out Christianity, it has sustained. And so we're going to look at how these 3 practices have helped and how you today could also deploy these. Now, for Christians, these are 3 essential practices. For those of you that may not be there yet, you're still kind of investigating the faith. These are 3 things that you're welcome to try out at any point, but they're not requirements, if that makes sense. So I just want to kind of couch it in that way. These 3 essentials, though, are essential for experiencing the abundant life that Jesus has in store for us. He doesn't have in store for us a weak life. He doesn't have in store for us a life that we get stuck in our shame and our guilt. He has in store for us great things. But these 3 things help us go through rough and difficult and chaotic times like we're living in. And if one of these has gone dormant in your life, then there's no time like the present to experience the potential that this app has for you. So these are what I'm calling life apps. And if there's value not in just understanding them, having the knowledge, but the value comes in the application of it, in using it, in actually experiencing what this can do for you. Now, there's 0 pressure for you if you're not a Christ follower, and there's a lot of pressure if you are a Christ follower to use this because it helps you. The opposite is still trying to figure everything out on your own. And so what I want to do is bridge that gap of that ancient church practice for you that changes things for the better. And I think the clearest teaching on this comes from James, who is a half-brother of Jesus. In James chapter 1, verse 22, he says, "Don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey, it's like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, you walk away, and you forget what you look like. But if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, then God will bless you for doing it." And once again, it comes back to that idea. Hearing it, reading it, knowing it, owning it, all good. But the next part is the application part. And James is clear on that throughout his entire writing here. There was a problem in the church of people being very smart. And the early church had this problem where people were very smart. And we have it today. People know a lot. They can tell you verse and chapter. They can quote the Bible to you. But they're not applying it. They're not living it out. And so James says, look, that's not what this is about. Don't just listen. Don't just know. Know and apply. Don't be just hearing people, but be doing people. Be a living embodiment of the Word of God. James says it's important not just to hear things, but to live those out. And so I want to look at 3 practices where it's not just theory, but where it actually impacts your life. So let's imagine you're like a smartphone again, and I'm like a smartphone, and we have these things that we know about, But here's why the church has found them to be impactful for over 2,000 years. In this series, we're going to spend the next 8 weeks talking about baptism, confession, and communion. These three practices, sometimes they're called ordinances or sacraments of the church. But no matter what language we use to describe them, they are three essential functions that are meant to help you. Particularly baptism, we just had a few weeks ago, is one of those things that you visually kind of make that first step without saying a word, and it identifies you with the community. So it's usually the first kind of step into the Christian community. It is this outward sign that you've trusted Christ, that you are beginning this journey. And it's kind of the enrollment process is how I've talked about it. And it's, you're just signing up for a class. You're signing up for this school of Jesus to learn more about what it means to be like him, to follow him fully. Confession is one we don't talk about all that much. And we'll talk about it in the context of prayer and how spending time in confession, getting things kind of off your chest is very powerful. And so we'll talk about that part of the church as an ordinance. And the last part, communion. And we received communion 2 weeks ago. And so we'll talk about how that happened and why that was created and why the church has found that so valuable, that Jesus gave us this. We'll talk about the history, but we'll also talk about the modern practice of it and why it's so important and why it is helpful. And all three of these things are things you do, right? Baptism is a thing that you take a step and you do. You get into the water. You go into the water and you come up out of the water. And that is a physical thing that you do in physical space. It's not just a mental assent. It's not just a, I agree. It's not just a knowing about it. It's not studying it or memorizing it. It is something you do. Communion, you receive the element. You receive that unleavened bread. You receive the juice. You receive that moment. And it's very tactile. Your senses are involved, taste and smell. You're eating something. There's something very human in that moment, but there's also, according to the scriptures, something very supernatural in that moment that connects you. And it connects us not only to each other through that shared experience, but it connects us to billions of other Christians in the same moment that are also on that same Lord's Day experiencing the same thing. It connects us throughout time to all of the saints dead and gone as well. It connects us to this huge movement all the way back to the ancient church, all the way back to Jesus sitting with those disciples in that upper room. That's really cool. And confession, this thing that is something you do with your mouth. You confess with your mouth. And boy, that's something that can sometimes feel very uncomfortable. And yet at the same time, it has such benefits for us. And so we'll talk about these spiritual benefits of how all these three things work together. Jesus said in Luke 11:28, even more blessed are all who hear the word of God and put it into practice. So once again, Jesus and James aligning on this central idea here. It makes more sense to put it into practice than to just hold on to it. Just to know a lot of stuff is not all that valuable, but it is actually putting it into practice. Putting our trust in Jesus into practice is far more valuable than just talking about it or just learning about it. Those are all good things, but they need to lead to a conclusion. They need to lead to the application. Sometimes, no matter how much we want to do the right thing, we want to do the thing we know we should do, we seem locked up. We kind of get trapped. I've called it in the past, I've said it's kind of like, and we don't really, I don't know if we have that anymore. I have a Mac now, so I don't deal with that as much. But if you remember the blue screen of death, maybe you see this still sometimes if you're a Windows user. The blue screen of death was the worst because it just meant your whole computer was done and you had to turn it off or restart it, and man, it's a mess. Macs don't have that as much, but if you have a Mac, you know what you get. It's the beach ball of death, right? It's that spinning little beach ball. Or worst comes to worst, and we just had to replace a 12-year-old Mac here, which was really scary this last week. We had to replace a computer, and it was getting so bad that sometimes the spinning ball of death would become just a beach ball. It wouldn't even spin, and so nothing would work, right? You have to kill the power to it. And so if you know what that is, you know that's very frustrating. On your phone, if that happens, most of the time there's not an easy way out. You've got to just power that thing off and restart. And usually that's the phone company trying to tell you it's time for a new phone, right? They want you to experience the pain of software upgrades so that you'll go, well, this thing's a piece of junk. I mean, it worked perfectly 12 months ago, but now it's just awful. So they get you in an upgrade cycle that way. But you know how frustrating that is, where you got to just turn the thing off and start over. And if you're working on something, many times on your computer or your phone, you'll lose that. So what do? You hold the power button down, you reset the phone, and 99% of the time, that fixes it, or with your computer, or with almost any electronic device. You call tech support, what are they going to tell you? First level tech support person, turn it off, unplug it, count 15 seconds. What is that magic 15 seconds? I don't know, I never understood that. Okay, now plug it back in. And then 99% of the time, it's over at that point. And so it's a reset button. And I would suggest to you that we're not all that different. That sometimes we get in really negative patterns. Sometimes we heard something as a teenager and we've carried that forth into adulthood. Unfortunately, that happens. Sometimes we've told ourselves a lie as an adult and we've let it go too long and it's taken root. And for 10 or 20 or 30 years, we've allowed this lie to just shape who we are. I see it all the time. I see it in folks that I invite to church. They're like, oh, I could never come to church. They wouldn't accept me, or God didn't want me there, or the building's going to fall down. I mean, I hear that one so much. I'm like, what? Who has told you this? But you know what that is? It's an automatic defense. It's the same automatic defense we use when some telemarketer calls and tries to sell us that extended auto warranty. Nope, don't need it. Nope. Didn't have a car, have a bike. Nope. I'm on skateboards. Don't call me again. It's that automatic defense. Salesman comes to the door. Here, I've got this to say. No, I don't. We're good. Automatic defenses. So people, when you invite them to church, if they have a history there of hurt or of pain or something in the past that is just unpleasant, automatic defense. And I hear that so much. And unfortunately, you got to kind of work through that, around that, over that, under that somehow, to get to the real situation there. And we're like that in a lot of ways in life. I don't like that restaurant. I don't like that kind of food. I'll never read that kind of book. I'll never go to that country. I'll never go visit that state. I don't like, we build that up and we just have this kind of like, and it's easier than thinking about choices, but what it does is it sets us up in a negative pattern and we need to reset. And I have found sometimes there's a restaurant that I'm like, nope, never going there again. I had a bad experience one time. And then someone makes me go for like a birthday or something, and I go, and I have a good experience, and I'm like, not so bad. Tomatoes were that way for me. I hated tomatoes growing up. I thought they were the most disgusting thing in the world. You get it on a burger, they inevitably would leave it on there, and I'm sloshing that thing off there. I'm like, why is it so wet? And why is my burger so wet? Now, this is disgusting. And then as an adult, I accidentally got a burger and had it with a tomato in it, and I was like, this is really amazing. This is delicious. Why doesn't everybody eat these on their hamburgers? And so I had a reset. And sometimes we need a reset like that in life. So what I'm going to encourage you through this series is to use this as a reset with maybe some of these practices. Maybe if you've never been baptized, for whatever reason, you have some sort of block to that. Maybe think about what that would look like for you. Maybe if communion isn't a part of your practice yet, think about why that could be popular or why that could be powerful in your life. And think maybe even recenter the practice of communion and what that accomplishes for you and why Jesus encouraged us to do that. And then confession. If you've fallen off on confession or if you've never experienced the freedom that comes from having a time with God alone and confessing those things, maybe really double down on that this summer and use that as an opportunity. And if nothing else, understand why we were given these ideas and why God gave us these practices and why they've sustained the church and why billions of Christians find them to be valuable, to thrive. For over 2,000 years, we've been repeating these practices because they're very powerful. Just like exercise for your body, these exercises are very powerful to build up your spiritual immunity, your spiritual strength, to build your relationship with God. And so I hope that you'll use this series as an opportunity to kind of reset, because ultimately to reset isn't failure. It's not failure. It is a necessary step towards progress. Just like resetting a computer, it gets you back on track with getting the applications loaded, or your phone, it gets you back on track with doing what you need to do to be productive. It's the same way in your life. Sometimes you just need to reset. And so I hope that you will use this summer as an opportunity to kind of spiritually reset. And there's more freedom in schedules, and there's more outdoor time, and there's more sun, and we're going to go enjoy some of that hopefully before the rain gets here today. That's our goal, is at the end of our service to just kind of have some time to hang out with each other. And so I encourage you not to run away. I encourage you to spend some time together. Some Sundays we'll have lunch afterwards, some we won't, but spend 10, 15 minutes just hanging out with each other and get to know each other, get to know someone new. That's my challenge for you. But maybe you need a spiritual reset this summer. I shared this scripture last week in the online service, and I love this. It's one of my favorites. From the psalmist, he says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul." Couldn't you use some of that refreshment this summer? Our world seems more chaotic and more dark than ever before. And it may just be perspective, because it's always been pretty dark and chaotic. But boy, it doesn't feel great right now. But there is hope. We're given hope. And so some of that is that we need to go back to the source of our hope to get true refreshment. That some of the things that we have supplemented have gotten us by, but they might not much any longer. It's the difference between survival and thriving. And maybe instead of just surviving the summer, we could actually find a way to thrive this summer, that we could come back together. And our goal at Coffee Creek is to help you to experience some of this refreshing time, the abundant life Jesus promises us, and rediscovering that through these church practices that have been given to us as gifts